Joseph's Egyptian attorney.
"Execute the slave,"
Pharaoh intoned, while sipping delicately from his wine.
"Why need we be troubled by such a common case?"
"It is Potiphar's slave," the high priest responded. "Potiphar himself requested the audience."
"Curious,"
Pharaoh replied, raising his eyes from his silver goblet.
"Let him in, then."
A royal guard solemnly announced,
"The Grand Chamberlain Potiphar."
2 other guards opened the tall, gold-encrusted doors to Pharaoh's public audience room. Potiphar, who had been waiting in the antechamber, walked in slower than usual. He was often summoned to the hall for business purposes. This was the first time he approached Pharaoh with such a sensitive personal issue. Potiphar noticed the rows of attendant priests sitting on either side of the hall. He saw the eunuchs standing with large palm branches at either end of the long marble-encased chamber. They fanned constantly, making the spacious room significantly cooler than the sun-baked outdoors. Potiphar walked past columns with statues of previous pharaohs and other figures from Egyptian history. Potiphar approached the throne. At 3 paces distance, he lowered himself to his knees and performed the customary obeisance. "Hail, Pharaoh, king and lord!"
"Hail, Pharaoh!"
the priest rejoined.
"King and lord!" "Potiphar,"
Pharaoh motioned for him to rise.
"Why do you bother us with such a petty crime? Kill the slave and be done with it."
"It's not so simple, O Pharaoh." Potiphar cleared his throat. "I am not sure that the slave is guilty."
"We do not understand the problem," Pharaoh said in a perturbed tone. "Your wife, the Grand Chamberlain's wife, accuses a lowly slave of accosting her, and we are sitting here debating his innocence. Have him killed and get yourself a new slave."
"Will the master of justice," interrupted a priest from the side, "not seek out justice?"
"Who is this insolent dog?" Pharaoh asked the high priest. "Can you not rein in your own priests?"
"I am but a humble servant," the daring priest continued with a perfect bow, "ready to serve Pharaoh in this case, that he may arrive at a wise and true resolution. Thus all the subjects of his kingdom will know yet again the divinity of his wisdom and power."
Continue, priest."
Pharaoh sat back, somewhat appeased. "Potiphar's wife, Zuleika, has accused their household slave of accosting her. Potiphar himself seems unsure. It may be worthwhile to examine the claims further in order to arrive at a deeper understanding of the truth." "Potiphar," the priest asked, "were there any witnesses to this supposed attack?"
"No." "So it is his wife's word against the slaves," Pharaoh interjected. "It is clear we listen to the wife."
"That is unless, O Pharaoh," the priest continued, "there is a reason to believe Zuleika is not telling the truth."
"Why should she lie about such a matter?" Pharaoh asked.
"O Son of Heaven," the priest waved dramatically. "Pharaoh, of all people, knows that all is not as it seems. Pharaoh can already sense that there is a mystery in this case, that only the brilliant mind of Pharaoh can uncover."
"Yes,"
Pharaoh cheered up.
"You speak the truth, priest. We shall bring light to the mystery where no mortal can. We must determine what truly happened. It may not be as she claims."
"By making the correct inquiries," the priest continued, "by thinking as no mere mortal can, Pharaoh will reveal the truth."
"When did this theoretical attack occur?" Pharaoh asked Potiphar.
"Yesterday."
"Yesterday was the overflowing of the Nile," Pharaoh thought out loud. "The entire kingdom was at the celebration at the river banks. That would explain why there were no witnesses. A convenient day for mischief. Does your wife bring any evidence of this attack?" Pharaoh pushed further.
"Yes," Potiphar answered. "She has the slave's garment that she claims he took off before his attack."
This is a poor omen for him, Pharaoh stated, looking at the priest for guidance. Why would the slave disrobe in her presence, unless it was for dishonourable intentions?
We should examine his garment, the priest suggested.
Yes, excellent idea, Pharaoh exclaimed. Fetch the slave's garment.
And hers also, added the priest.
Hers also? Pharaoh was confused. Why do we require her garment?
Much may be learned from the fabrics that witness the true events, the priest explained.
Of course, Pharaoh agreed. Bring the garment she wore at the time of the reported attack, Pharaoh commanded a nearby guard. Make sure you receive verification from someone else of the household that they are indeed the correct garments. And be quick about it, Pharaoh added excitedly. We gods do not have forever. The guard rushed out of the hall. In the meantime, what else can we discover about the case? Pharaoh asked, eager to make progress. Where are your wife and the slave now?
In the antechamber.
Wonderful!
Pharaoh clapped his hands with glee.
Who should we start with?
The slave? Volunteered the priest.
Why the slave?
Pharaoh eyed the priest suspiciously. Pharaoh already knows what Zalicha claims, but he has yet to hear the slave, the priest calmly explained. Perhaps the slave will admit his sin, which will bring the case to a quick solution. Pharaoh seemed mildly dejected by the thought. Or perhaps he will reveal some new information that only the insightful mind of Pharaoh will perceive. Pharaoh will then have the opportunity to probe his suspicions and re-examine Zalicha's claims. Pharaoh nodded in agreement.
Call in the slave, he commanded.
Joseph walked into the hall wearing a simple slave's tunic. He looked curiously at the statues and paused briefly by one as if in recognition. He continued to make his way towards the throne. All eyes looked impassively at Joseph, most of all Pharaoh's.
We requested the slave, Pharaoh asked in confusion. Who is this handsome princeling?
For Joseph indeed seemed handsome to Pharaoh, perhaps the most beautiful man he had ever encountered, and he seemed to Pharaoh hauntingly familiar. I am Joseph, slave to Potiphar. I am a Hebrew, unrightfully brought from Canaan. A murmur of incredulity stirred from within the attendant priests.
A Hebrew?
Pharaoh asked with a combination of repulsion and curiosity.
But so handsome, you look more like a man of royal descent than a slave.
I am the great-grandson of Abraham, whom you may recall visited your ancestor more than a century ago.
Abraham? Can it be?
To everyone's surprise, Pharaoh jumped out of his throne and ran to Joseph. He took Joseph by the arm and forcefully dragged him back down the hall towards the entrance. The surrounding guards quickly followed their leash. The priests got out of their chairs and followed the strange procession. The high priest and Potiphar caught up and stayed close to Pharaoh. The eunuchs stayed in their places, mechanically fanning the room. Pharaoh stopped next to one of the female statues and placed Joseph next to it.
It is true! He is the spitting image of her!
Who is she? Potiphar asked.
That is the statue of Sarah. The legend is told that she was the consort of our predecessor for a short while. She was considered the most beautiful woman in the world. It was our great-great-grandfather that commissioned this statue of her as a reminder of her extreme beauty.
The assembled crowd kept looking at Joseph and back at the statue of Sarah. They were clearly related. Their likeness certainly couldn't be coincidental. The fine shape of the nose, the clear brow, the high cheekbones, the almond-shaped eyes, the firm lips, even the curl of the hair was identical.
What a mystery indeed, Pharaoh exclaimed. Your accused slave is none other than Sarah incarnate. Why is everyone standing around? Back to your posts! What was your name again?
Pharaoh turned to Joseph as the priests and guards skittered back to their places. I am Joseph, O Pharaoh.
Yes, Joseph. Let us continue this investigation.
Pharaoh strode back to his throne with Joseph. Potiphar and the high priest were close behind. Pharaoh sat again with a regal flourish.
Slave,
Pharaoh addressed Joseph.
did you or did you not accost Potiphar's wife?
I did not accost my master's wife, O Pharaoh.
Why does she claim otherwise?
I cannot say, O Pharaoh. Joseph glanced meaningfully at Potiphar.
You know that the penalty for a slave attacking a master is death, Pharaoh explained. If you do not produce a viable explanation, we shall have no choice but to execute you, as pretty as you might be, or as illustrious an ancestry as you may have.
I could only guess the motivations of my master's wife in accusing me when I am blameless. However, were I to in turn cast aspersions upon her, it may dishonor my master, who has been so good and kindly to me. Handsome and honorable, piped in the daring priest coming back from the sidelines.
True, Pharaoh noted, but it does not help his case or chances of survival. He may be dismissed. Bring in Potiphar's wife.
Joseph was unceremoniously escorted out of the chamber. A few moments later, Zuleika walked in. The royal guard formally announced,
Zuleika, wife of the Grand Chamberlain.
Zuleika glided into the hall in an austere and demure ceremonial gown. She bowed down next to her husband.
Zuleika,
Pharaoh motioned for her to rise.
Why do you claim that your slave accosted you?
Because he did, O Pharaoh, Zuleika responded with a mixture of pride and pain.
We have reason to believe that he may be innocent.
Innocent? I have stated otherwise, O Pharaoh. That slave has been eyeing me since the day he arrived. He waited patiently until the house was empty, lured me into my bedroom, and then attacked me. I have the evidence of his garment, which I understand Pharaoh has so wisely summoned. I was his prey. Perhaps the hunted was really the hunter, the priest whispered to Pharaoh. Pharaoh looked bewilderedly at the priest as he tried to make sense of his words. What woman could resist the extreme beauty we just witnessed? The priest continued in an undertone. Perchance there was truly an encounter yesterday between Zuleika and Joseph, but the roles were reversed.
Prove it!
Pharaoh banged on his throne.
It is well and good to play at finding this slave innocent, but to accuse an important noblewoman of adultery is a dangerous game.
At that moment, the dispatched guard returned with 2 garments in his hand. He approached Pharaoh with them. Divine timing, the priest said to himself. O Pharaoh, if we were to ask the lady and the slave to wear their garments of the period in question, we may gain greater insight into the events.
Make it so,
Pharaoh thundered, losing his patience. The guard handed the dress to Zuleika, who exited after him. A few moments later, both Zuleika and Joseph entered the hall and walked towards the throne. Zuleika, if I may, the priest inquired, why did you not participate in the celebrations of the overflowing of the Nile yesterday? I was ill. And is this your customary attire when you are ill? Your dress reveals more than it conceals. I believe that, except for the eunuchs, no man here can help but be drawn by your obvious and overflowing beauty. O Pharaoh, this dress has one purpose only, seduction.
That is no proof.
True, but it is an indication. Let us examine further. You will also note that Zuleika's garment is in excellent condition, one that does not even hint at any violence. The slave's garment, however, is torn. You might argue that in his fit of passion the slave tore his garment, but let us examine the tear carefully. O Pharaoh, if Pharaoh will, please clasp the slave's garment right by the rip. Bemused, Pharaoh got off the throne, walked to Joseph, and grabbed the garment at the tear. In the divine opinion of Pharaoh, could this tear have been self-inflicted?
No, the tear is in the back. He could not have reached it himself.
That eliminates the possibility that the slave ripped his garment out of passion, the priest deduced. Perhaps it caught on something. He tripped and then it ripped.
That is not possible either, Pharaoh noted. This garment was ripped by a human hand.
Heavenly deduction, my dear Pharaoh. Then, if he did not do it himself, and it was not an accident, and there was no one else in the house at the time, there is only one person that could have ripped that garment, Zelicha. The question now, however, is why? Was she ripping the garment in an effort at self-defense?
No!
Pharaoh exclaimed excitedly.
The tear was made by pulling away from the garment. That means the slave was moving away from the woman when she tore it. This slave is clearly innocent.
And the woman, therefore, is enough! Pharaoh stopped the priest.
It is enough that the slave is innocent. We do not need to besmirch her name, nor that of her husband. Furthermore, this matter cannot be revealed, and the slave cannot go unpunished, lest others then discover the truth. What shall we do with him?
Let him fit in jail, the high priest offered.
Yes, agreed Pharaoh. Jail is certainly better than execution.
Perhaps the royal jail, whispered the daring priest to Pharaoh. This one requires close watch, someplace nearby. Pharaoh nodded and signaled his secretary.
We have decided that the slave known as Joseph shall be placed in our royal prison, announced Pharaoh with some pomp. Word of this case, as gratifying as it was for us to solve, shall not leave this hall on pain of death. Thus, truth is revealed, justice is served, and the kingdom flourishes.
Pharaoh turned towards the priest, but he was no longer there.
Where is that priest?
Pharaoh asked, not seeing him anywhere in the hall. All heads in the room turned to look for him, but the daring priest was nowhere in sight.
Who was he?
Pharaoh then asked the high priest. I do not know, your majesty, replied the high priest nervously. We have never seen him before.
That is a shame,
Pharaoh answered nonchalantly, sipping from his wine again.
He would have made a good adviser.